British generals being captured alive. Chairman Philip Namie, the new field commander of the general headquarters, the Shuranai Command as newly renamed the Leech Odin Pi 39 Connor Corps, and the new Frand transferred to provide support from Michael Zambia, Paris commander of the 2nd Armored Division. Romeo launched a surprise attack within just 2 weeks, shifting from defense to lightning-fast offensive. This forced the British troops to retreat to Egypt, resulting in the loss of all previous gains. This defeat led to the dismissal of General Chippo, the commander-in-chief of the Central and Eastern Fronts. During this process, Romeo faced fierce opposition from the Italian military high command, who felt he was disobedient to orders. Romeo then received orders from the supreme command of the country that he should not cross the border, but should remain. However, Romeo ignored these orders and carried out his plan, despite the disapproval of the Axis generals. Nevertheless, Allied forces greatly admired Romeo and 39's reputation for disobedience on the battlefield. A shrewd general, nicknamed the Nquat, Desert Fox Quat, decided to promote him to the rank of General of Europe after the victory. Romeo then ordered his troops to besiege the remaining port city. The remaining sea was mine, Luke aiming for a route to Egypt. This city was being defended by 25 Zalhausen troops, and the Australians were planning an I requested a defensive plan from the commander, but he gave the excuse that it was too urgent and could unfederate 39th provide it in time. It could also be due to my own insubordination, causing the Italians to refuse to cooperate. I also didn't 39th receive support from the German High Command because he didn't in 39th follow orders. Therefore, Romeo and 39's attacks were repelled by the Allied forces. Although he didn't in 39th capture the city, the Germans tightly surrounded it. Facing a much larger Allied force, I had to gradually withdraw from the areas I had previously occupied. From March and April, the Germans had to withdraw their troops, taking advantage of the victory. Romeo launched surprise counterattack in January, recapturing the city. This city, strategically located on the Mediterranean Sea, pushed the Allied forces back to the garage, and they had to organize a tight defense. My parents, it was also his Africa, and he managed the attack on the Allied forces in Dalat. Even though the German army was stronger, the cat-like figures still caused the Allied forces to fall into weak hands and forced them to retreat. The Allied forces suffered a complete defeat and had to withdraw, continuing to help players achieve resounding victories. When facing stronger opponents helped I win Gmail be promoted to Marshal. It is related to the assassination attempt on Hitler from 1940. Realizing that continuing the war would put the country at a disadvantage, Romeo tried to persuade Hitler to negotiate a peace treaty with the army. Allies, however, did not want a peace treaty. Hitler even said that if he couldn't in 39th win, he would let the German nation perish completely in the spirit of a great nation. Romeo was sent to France. He organized defenses along the coast. On July 17, 1944, Allied bomb and severely wounded, forcing him to return to Germany. At this time, a secret group, including Hitler and Faye 39's friend Paloma, was operating in Germany. They came to him and said they would overthrow Hitler and offer him a. On July 20, 1944, the assassination attempt on Hitler failed. The testimonies directed towards whichever country would be in power were very popular with the people. Romeo and Faye 39's glorious achievements were reported in Germany, helping the Germans overcome their sadness over the defeats on the Eastern Front. The German people loved Romeo and considered him to be under the control of the people. Hitler did not want to use Romeo for the sake of the people, fearing that he would lose the people and soldiers, so he planned to have Romeo retire early. However, some generals in the Gmail did in Fe 39th love email. He used it to punish Hitler. He used yoga to punish the female cat Hitler. Set conditions: he was declared dead from war wounds, and his family would not be destroyed. If he disobeyed, Gmail would be put on trial, implicating his entire family. Gmail chose a peaceful death by a dose of highly toxic cyanide to protect his family. He was declared dead from war in a state-level military ceremony. Only after the war did people know the cause of death of Field Marshal. Yes, the world tried Nazi crimes, but not the Desert Fox. When the war ended, the world organized trials for Nazi crimes. Many generals and officers of the Nazi army were tried, whether living or dead, but there was no field marshal among them. people discovered that Gmail in Viet 39's army never massacred or harassed the people. Wherever his army went, the people were at peace if the Allied forces were considered and liberated. The people of the Nazis, strangely enough, in Africa, many people still viewed the army as a threat. The mail shipment liberated North Africa from self-imposed domination. This was achieved through very strict orders, requiring subordinates and commanders to absolutely respect the people of the host country. Gmail also received many orders to execute Allied prisoners of war, but he did not obey. For example, on the North African front, he received orders from German generals to execute captured Allied Special Forces soldiers. Selena Gomez was fortunate that this order was given to treat the presidents well, even though German soldiers were of poor quality. Then there in 39's the story that Romeo knew the manager had taken his wristwatch and belongings. He immediately fell in love with her and had to return them to their owner. There are many stories like that Chrome has. Many have recounted and recorded by historians and writers in their books. He also highly valued his soldiers, even though in war he was famous for his lightning-fast attacks, using few to defeat many, not wanting to waste effort in a beneficial way. When there was a convoy of African troops that no longer had a well-designed logistics and armored vehicles, the tanks no longer looked at the campfire and rarely missed the order to fight to the last soldier. They fought to the last bullet. The cat did not obey this order, but proactively ordered the entire army to retreat, preserving the lives of the soldiers. In a National Assembly meeting, enough for Kiyu to say that when we have a very brave and talented opponent, and I can say more clearly that on the other side of this devastating war is a great general, Allied generals such as his mobile and American development also wholeheartedly. Fooklock, a loyal officer serving him, always said that anyone who falls into his powerful presence becomes a true soldier. He seemed to know what his enemy was like and how they would fight back. Today, Romeo in 39's name is given to 2 military bases and several streets in Germany. In his homeland, there is land. From the praises of his heroism, courage, and as a victim of the totalitarian regime, years before November 20, 1945, greatest sacrifice in history, the Olympus Court tried American and German war criminals during World War II, a war won by the Allied powers. The Soviet Union, the United States, and the organization was officially established, and all leading figures of the Nazi regime who were still alive were brought before the court, and most were sentenced to death. However, name of the father of German mechanized warfare was not among those led to execution. Wonderland, born in 1888 and died in 1954 as a prime. Let in 39's explore the spectacular journey of a brilliant staff officer to a forgotten figure from the coast, under the shadow of the CAT team, mentioning the glorious victories and the terrifying offensive power of the Nazi German tank tracks in World War II. Most people will immediately think of the Desert Fox, the Field Marshal, Halloween, and so on. Therefore, few remember the founder who laid the foundation and directly commanded the first pioneering campaigns. That person was Kane. In the goal area, he was entirely a yellow-skinned, cat-headed battlefield commander, but rather resembled a military thinker, a staff officer whose work was more prominent than anything else. To put it briefly, without understanding the life of a legendary figure, there would be no German armored corps. Even studying the Blitzkrieg doctrine of the Nazi German army would be difficult to perfect. So the Nquat seed-dwelling Quat figure embraced his ideas and delved deep into his thoughts about creating the waffle in the 1920s, because Germany during the First World War was not yet allowed, in fact, never allowed to establish an army in Vietnam. Starting as a communications officer, he became a logistics officer, then a staff officer. In the operations departments, he understood the core importance of logistics on the battlefield and deeply felt the need for modernization and mechanization to enhance mobility. If given the chance for revenge, it in 39's worth adding here that the defeat in the First World War still remains. This caused widespread dissatisfaction among the German population, who believed the army had been stabbed in the back by the cowardice of the government. Therefore, the harsh terms imposed on Germany regarding the victory paved the way for Exciter to rise to the political stage. Simultaneously, it also won over and suppressed many high-ranking officers in the army. Brazil was no exception, using his fluent English and French, real easily accessed, research documents on tanks and military mechanization from the victorious powers. From there, through several training sessions, he formed the military ideology of Yang Mi in 1929. He asserted that tanks should no longer play a supporting role. Instead, tanks should be reorganized within the core units of the army with infantry and armored units, if necessary, without the need for mechanization. All supporting components, including artillery and infantry, must be mechanized to keep pace with the operational demands of the military. Only one decision was made: every tank had to be equipped with video radio to ensure absolutely secure information exchange, allowing for the development of large-scale operations in the field. Those familiar with traditional tactical thinking strongly opposed it. Don in 39 give up, but William also faced many difficulties until he received their support. Gira, who really likes the lightning bolt symbol, sent it to me. For Hitler and Fe 39's Nazi party came to power in Germany in 1935, that government declared it would abandon the peace treaty and the surrender of Germany after war. October 1935, Colonel Austin the Heater established the first 3 German armored divisions. In 1936, he was promoted to brigadier general. In 1938, he was further promoted to lieutenant general, personally commanding German tank columns that invaded and merged with the enemy. At that time, the tanks were organized so that units at the level of armored corps or armored divisions were ready to undertake mobile attack roles in. In October 1939, Korean was appointed commander of the 19th Panzer Corps, preparing to capture the Polish territory in just 4 days from September 1st to 5th. Mission was completed with a very small organization of 150 officers and 7 in the field of combat operations. Afterward, the unit, commanded by Galileo, always led the charge, demonstrating the swiftness of the strategy. In 1 month, Poland, Bindeen, and Villarreal received the Knight in 39's Cross. This was part of the struggle to build a modern armored force, turning the spearhead towards Western Europe from 4 divisions, 10 armored divisions. At that time, Vidal was only a brigadier general, commanding the 10th Armored Division. Once again, Vidal took on the leading role. He was the one who, as a staff officer, had previously planned the route to bypass the impregnable French defensive line. He resolutely refused to stop pursuing the enemy. The Buddhist Dharma was ready to clash with the rank of General Voice. On May 20, 1940. The corps under his command was the first to approach the French, but the French turned back to create a favorable situation to force the surrender of almost all of the French army after the decisive battle. It is not surprising that after this campaign he was immediately awarded the rank of general, but the father of the oil and water industry was completely deserving even with a controlling rank. The problem is that it never happened. The true In the first stage of fighting the Soviet Union, the victories of the Nazi army were still heavily marked by naval forces. However, by the autumn of 1941, both the great supply shortages and the orders to constantly change the focus of the war issued by Hitler had already reached that point, not to mention the extremely brave Red Army behind him, which cooled the waters. Nengo Delan recognized many practical aspects of the problem, but because of that, he gradually became a thorn in his side. He spoke to him until he was completely furious. From the article about the doctor, it was reported that too many German soldiers were freezing to death, while their tanks could in 39th start due to the terrible cold of the German winter. He repeatedly requested a withdrawal to rest and recuperate, but each time I replied that returning home to Germany was not allowed. Taking a step back, the starving cold soldiers, built on a lack of fuel, were essentially expelled from Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad, and April. He could do nothing more than engage in conflict. Regarding the general in Fe 39's position as commander of the German Central Army Group, he was dismissed after being withdrawn to the front lines and assigned the task of developing production such as training the World in 39's meat producers. The last effort of this victorious general at the beginning of World War II was to dissuade Hitler from fighting to the death with the Red Army at the Arc de Triomphe, but of course that was his intention. From then until the proposal, the situation ended, never to be resolved. He never had the opportunity to directly command the islands of the country. Furthermore, he was constantly embroiled in conflicts and fierce arguments to the point of being forced to take a 6-week leave since March 1945. From April 1845, Viet Nam was captured by the American Army and imprisoned until 1948. Perhaps it was precisely because of his unwavering resistance that he escaped all charges. At the trial, he was judged to be merely a part of the Japanese forces. You may not know that Raven, even from the conflict with Chrome Mail, was then a field marshal thanks to his victories on the battlefield. Regarding the arrangement of defensive forces to intercept the Allied landing force. In 1944, the pro-Russian forces wanted armored vehicles close to the coast to overwhelm the landing force with firepower, but Warren argued that this would increase the risk of having to switch to sand, conditions that were not favorable. Hitler was the one who offered a middle ground solution with a position in the middle of the line. After being released from Wonderland and returning home in 1950, he wrote books and contributed to national thought. The Federal Republic of Germany and Viet 39's government and military command. Died in 1954 from heart failure. Victory Span and Polish Field Marshal. He was the highest ranking officer in the Nazi German army. He held the highest position in the Nazi and Allied forces during the Battle of Stalingrad, and was captured just one day after being promoted to the highest rank. However, Portion 39's fate took a different turn when the Soviet Red Army did not execute him, despite the outcome of abandoning Hitler and working as a propagandist for Marshall led this highest-ranking field marshal of Nazi Germany to become a propagandist for the Soviet Red Army. Find out the answer in the video with military knowledge. Until January 1943, Nazi German army in the Battle of Stalingrad was inevitable. This spectacular event changed the course of World War II, which lasted 6.5 months. The Soviet Union lost more than 1 million. German naval casualties included 950,000 in the 6th Army Corps under the command of Lieutenant General Frederick Helth, along with others, was surrounded and annihilated. On the second to the last day of the battle, the Nazi leader, now promoted to Marshal, gave a clear order in his final message and quote a marshal who had been captured by Hitler, who had committed suicide when captured by the Soviet Union, but who chose life and surrendered on January 1st, 1973, a surrender of the Marshal was very important not only in terms of prestige after the invasion by the Soviet government, but also because the Soviet government had given German communists refuge in the Soviet Union in the 1930s through the establishment of an anti-fascist organization. The Seventh Lottery in Stalingrad weakened faith in German tradition, or 91,000 soldiers who had been taken prisoner. This was a rather good occasion for the launch of the anti-fascist organization, which had been the unified name of the armed forces of the Nazi German army since from 1935 to 1945, in terms of including here Chris Medina Plus and turning this on. This was the